everyone's been a tourist.
Alright everybody, I think we're going to start. Thank you for coming. I'm Amber. Thanks for coming to the event today. We're delighted to announce that CRASSH will be running for a second year, with conveners including myself, Lauren Anderson, Daniela Meneses Sala, Rory Patterson Achenbach, Sophie Marie Yang and Sonji Shah, some of whom will be joining for the workshop later. Now I'm delighted to welcome Issey Goold to Ambivalent Archives this morning to give her artist talk titled Generating Stanley, a demi-fable of queer lineage. Drawing on a variety of lens and screen-based practices, ranging from digital film, wet plate collodion, and inkjet, Gould's work brings questions central to Ambivalent Archives to the fore, exploring the intersection of archival technologies, representation, and storytelling. She is currently living and working in Brooklyn, New York, and we are delighted that she's been able to travel to present this work to us today. Her work has been exhibited at numerous prestigious galleries, including the Royal Hibernian Academy, Ireland, and Studio 10, Dublin, as well as featured in group exhibitions alongside local Irish artists, including Iova Group, Abbey Artist Studios, and Hen's Teeth. She has had work published in several national publications, including the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, Life magazine, and Gay Community News. Most recently, her work was exhibited at June Shine in Williamsburg, New York, and Gould has an honours in BFA in Fine Art Media from the National College of Art and Design, Ireland, and a postgraduate diploma in Cultural Policy and Arts Management from University College Dublin. She also studied film, video, and photography for an exchange semester at the Rhode Island School of Design, USA. So I was told to say something cute now, and so what I came up with was that I feel like when I was growing up, so many people looked at me and were like, oh, you've got your mum's nose, or your dad's shoulders, and like there's so many people in me that I didn't know. And I would always be like, no, I'm not, I'm myself, like they look like me, da, da, da. And I think as you get older, you want to reconnect with those stories. And for so long, I looked outside of myself. My mum's from Barbados, and so I read a load of Caribbean literature and I did all of this. And I think there's really something really lovely about the idea that there are like so many names you have in families that you can't put a face to. And that actually, maybe my face is the face that they will have. So on that note, I'm very excited to meet Stanley.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Hi, my name is Issey, and I just want to thank everybody for having your time today, and for Ambivalent Archives existing and having me here. It's really special to be able to share the story of Stanley beyond my curiosity and excitement in a project that has kind of just blossomed from that exact seed. So I didn't further wait, I'll just get into it. When I was younger, I saw this photo. It was around the time I was about 15, and my granduncle had passed, and he was in his house in Leitrim, and there was this photo of this male dressed woman and a brother that I found out in my granduncle's house. And during his removal, I was asking family, being like, who is this? I was like, queer, I'm curious. And it was my first introduction to Stanley. And I was told that oh, that's Stanley. They were I had this kind of aura about how they were explained to me. And yeah, I have not seen that photo since. I don't know where it's gone. But I'm so happy that encounter happened because it stayed with me. And yeah, so it was kind of, I was kind of left then with this knowledge. And then when I tried to kind of find this photo, we jumped ahead, have we? There's a missing slide, that's fun. I'll just continue more then with Stanley, who I found out was then years later then, in around 2021, when my grandmother had passed, and I was in 2021, I was 26 then, so 10 years later, at a funeral again, and around family, I was asking if anybody knew who Stanley was, and mentioned how this photo was lost, but how I had seen it, and I got a response of, and it stuck with me, was she was a he if she could be. And yeah, I like from that it was just kind of the little extra bits of information I got was, you know, she wore men's clothes and pinstripe suits and was remembered as an angry and didn't get along with family. According to a member, they disappeared to London in the middle of the 1940s after receiving inheritance and was never heard of again. And about a month later after that, I was given a family tree from my aunt, and with that I kind of got what information I could from that to confirm and trace with national archives online, and it was just even immediately on the family tree that was kind of made by a relative of mine, Edward McCann's his name. He drew up the family tree, and yeah, you can just see next to Stanley's name femme, just to kind of assert the gender, and there's just this kind of small footnote, but it was great. This was exactly what I needed in order to kind of get another step into the project, because online I managed then to find out Stanley's birthday. This was Stanley's birth registry from the National Archives that I got access to, and kind of just noticing then just kind of this cataloguing of information, and just knowing that it is definitely Stanley from this unique point that this is a daughter named Stanley. But it was a big revelation for me to kind of see how the name Stanley was actually given from birth to begin with. I thought and I had assumed that, you know, this person, and it's a normal thing, and it's a common thing in Irish society that people just went with whatever name they preferred to have rather than what they were christened with. There's so many people that are oh, my name is this. Even my grandmother was Thaddeus, but she was I am Patricia, and she's don't call me Thaddeus, and I was just there's a whole roads of women that would be called Mary, and they just preferred that name. And I had then thought that it was a similar type of deal with Stanley wanted to be Stanley, but it was moving for me to see that Stanley was actually always Stanley. And you know, just I had this huge question then left when I saw the census information of this, even as this is a census was written in from 1911, and so Stanley was born in 1909. Stanley was a baby, and they seem to have even forgotten that Louisa was actually Stanley's first name when writing it in. And it was also, I found out then from here too that Stanley's mother was also Louisa Stanley. So there's also this belonging of this name from generations before, which also was just such a wonderful surprise to find, as well as also it's coming from people that I can't meet and ask. So there's also just the treat and the speculation of it all too. So yeah, with this information then I tried to kind of gather more information, and then last year I got to have a trip on my birthday to my oldest living relative, Auntie Rita, who's my grandaunt, and she's 97 years old, and she agreed to be recorded and have a conversation, and we asked her about Stanley, and this is just, I was with my mother and her son as well, so yeah, this is just a snippet of the recording. I don't know if you can hear. No, you can't. Okay.
Did you have any photos of Stanley? I don't know what Stanley looked like.
She stood still. She stood still. Was she fair-haired or dark-haired?
She was dark.
Dark-haired,
I think.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have crossed her path too often.
Yeah.
But sure, she was dark and quite stylish.
Okay.
Is she tall?
Not particularly tall.
Stylish.
She would have been tall, but not over.
Not overly. Yeah.
Interesting.
And she's a bit of a
I know, I
I
know.
stole a photograph and we wanted to draw it again.
Yeah, I suppose, what do you call it, isn't it, what's his name, the McCann fella, he probably, from Belfast. Eddie.
That's it.
Eddie, yeah. He'd have other photographs. He might be able to tell us who that's in that photograph. Have you a phone number for Edward?
I
No?
do, yeah. Well, just he
So then Edward just sort of concluded that then was the relative I later got in touch with for more kind of archive information.
Do you have any photos?
And yeah, so later I did chase up that seed and got more images that will be later in, but none of Stanley unfortunately. But so yeah, just in terms of then my response to and where I was going with this is like I very much this whole time I'm thinking about this as an artist practitioner, and for me it was always about it always is about like answering these questions, or not even answering, but like just thinking through all of this with photography, and then what I'm thinking through and what questions these are is like, where is that photo from my first encounter with Stanley has always been the question. What could I know of Stanley's queerness? How much am I projecting onto Stanley's significance? What are the ethical implications of creating someone's image without their consent? Because I was thinking of, how to kind of recreate this image. What does it mean to resurrect the appearance of somebody? What is the boundary line between interpretation and historical truths? And am I trying to liberate Stanley or expose the root of a family secret which has reverberated the past into my presence? So explicitly in that, it was my own experience of being queer within my family and my immediate kinship with Stanley, and thinking am I making amends to this type of response to being queer in this family, this whole kind of standoffish approach that people had to Stanley's identity. I think my kinship to Stanley was just so natural that I think it was just part of this question too. So yeah, thinking with that, majorly influential theorist for me has been Sylvia Hartman. So this quote is, every historian of the multitude, the dispossessed, the subaltern and the enslaved is forced to grapple with the power and authority of the archive and the limits it sets on what can be known, whose perspective matters, and who is endowed with the gravity and authority of the historical actor. And I think, with Hartman, she thinks through theory, whereas in creative practice was the research for the answers I was looking for. And then kind of just to kind of lead on more with Hartman is what kind of really spoke to my thinking as well was in Minor Figure. It's in her book Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments. So in a second now. So it's it is how the world still remembers her. So this photo is of a person whose name wasn't etched onto the record, so this person's name is missing. And then Hartman writes is with this image that is left, and what she speculates from it is, it is how the world remembers her. The only thing I knew for sure was that she did have a name and a life that exceeded the frame in which she was captured. A name is a luxury she isn't afforded. Other sitters are unnamed but they can be identified. She's the only one who is anonymous, which, like, the core that struck with me was Stanley doesn't have an image, but definitely had a life that exceeded the frame. And this speaking of like the frame and being, and like what was kind of beyond it. Like I just kind of validated this kind of idea of being like, well, yes, Stanley definitely existed and had a life. So yeah, just that parallel was incredibly helpful in my thinking. And then yeah, kind of along with like my questions and, you know, Venus in Two Acts in her writing there, she says, how can narrative embody life in words and at the same time respect what we cannot know? Is it possible to construct a story from the locus of impossible speech or resurrect lives from the ruins? Can beauty provide an antidote to dishonor and love a way to exhume buried cries and reanimate the dead? Another thing as well I wanted to just say on the last slide as well was, of course, the material conditions are very different to the ones I'm reckoning with. Hartman with race in America and I with queerness in an Irish family. And yet, like, just the parallels were just so clear. And yeah, I think then, you know, Hartman then just response in terms of creating fiction, and what its possibilities are, was just a very supportive and, like, again, influential. So where did my imagination go with all this information? Immediately I thought, you know, rather than just my own personal connection to Stanley in terms of thinking of back, well, someone who was born in 1909, but also just my own imagination taking that into wild directions too. It just, like, what in history informs me of my visual understanding and historical knowledge of queer Irish women, and like yeah, so like in terms of like kind of articulating what that visual vocabulary is in my imagination, I went to my mind went to people like Anne Bonny. She was the most famous cross-dressing woman in Cork in the 17th century. She disguised herself as a man to become a pirate and met another passing woman, Mary Read. Together they were notorious not only as pirates but as lovers. Then an incredible figure then to me is Eva Gore Booth. She was Constance Markovich's sister. And she was a playwright, sister of Constance, of course. She played a huge part in the suffragist movement, and although she did not live in Ireland, she was constantly visiting and had a lot of lesbian friends there. Her views were one of that gender roles were only embedded into our heads because of our culture. And this was in 1915. She founded a magazine called Uranium and Urania. And like, you know, this as well, like, has great overlap in terms of Stanley's lifetime, so it does helps to inform me of possibility of queer discourse that Stanley may have been conscious of, but I can't know for sure. And yeah, just in times like, you know, Urania's mission statement and being like, sex is an accident, it's just such a radical statement. And this was, admittedly though, like that published, at least in that manuscript, or that copy in this image here is when Stanley would have been 10 years old. So there's those limitations, of course, too. But this publication was in production up until 1940, well into Stanley's adulthood. And yeah, this in these photos is Esther Roper's Eva Gore's lover. And then we also have these wonderful people. So yeah, just to note as well, like a good number of the 1916 rebels were same-sex lovers. Particularly notable women were Madeleine French Mullen and Kathleen Lynn, who look incredible in this photo here. And I know beyond that there was more figures that, for this slideshow, I couldn't remember the names for, but yeah, it's just a known fact, at least in my imagination and consciousness. So why tintype? Outside of art history, I thought about practices of photography that belonged to times and in earlier periods because of this whole historical leap backwards in my imagination. And like I was already practicing with tintype and had been, because of using this, it already belonged to this idea of like a visual vocabulary to historical times. And then this, yeah, I think this also is part of why I was pulling the threads of Stanley's story. And yeah, it was a process as well, though at the same time I was learning to make in my grandmother's shed too. It wasn't any means a formal education I had. I bought this camera in 2021, and this was the book that I bought online from researching how to learn how to do this and how to make tintypes. And it was that simple as well, but happy to kind of have these handed around if anybody wants to look at any of these, and there's some of the tintypes I hand out in a moment too. So yeah, tintype photography, like what is a tintype? So tintype was developed in 1853 by Adolf Alexander Martin in Paris, and then it came 14 years after the daguerreotype. So I know that it was in 1837 Louis Daguerre in France developed the daguerreotype, which is a much more kind of silver and polished version of what tintype is, but a lot more expensive too. But so tintype became most popular during the 1860s and 70s, and then kind of went out of kind of use and popularity from the 1930s onwards. But there's still that little kind of gap, or like that little spot on which it is Stanley's lifetime, especially up to Stanley's 20s and around my age. But it's also, like, I work with this, I have the plates here, I'll be handing it out in a moment too. But tintype for me, like, it's the most archival form of photography, like, ever since it's existed. Once a plate is varnished, at least, they say that they last up to 170 years and counting, because that's the time since they have been invented. And I think, it offers them this permanence of image to give back to this lost photo of Stanley, which I thought as well of, as a practitioner before the Stanley Project, it was important to me to create photos of queer community that I had, for this idea of like this permanence and archival. So here is some of my photos that I've taken that I was already making. So that's, to begin, John Mangrew, Harry and Sally, those are two twins, and Harry and my friend Nadia. And like, just even when you take photos, you begin to kind of like have responses of being like, dating it more to like modern days. Like John Mangrew kind of looks like in 1850s Britney Spears to me. And then like Harry at the last photo at the end wearing Adidas tracksuit pants, I thought as well, it was just the thing that makes that photo exciting to me. Just that, like, this as well, like, already it was only 2021, and like the thinking along these lines of like already making these photos, AI software was actually only at the dawn of mass access, and we always knew that it had like these strange type of like just like very very beginning faults, and yeah, just kind of like in terms of characteristics of my work, in terms of visible faults, you have like my actual thumbprint being like of like taking the things out in these wet plate processes. So there's these kind of tactile traces. Then yeah, just another kind of one of photos of my work with my friend Hiram Harrington, and this was after his top surgery. This was a very kind of, this was I think towards the end of the expiration date of the chemical, so it wasn't the most clear photos. But I still think that like there's a material kind of quality that I think is you know, very interesting and at least just belongs to the medium. And yeah, so then my AI image generating journey. At the time of when I began making these works, the kind of top, and also like the top kind of standard of AI image making would be Midjourney V5. It's the kind of, it's the one that you have to pay for. But it's currently now V, it stands for version, so version 6 is available, and that's down the line of what I'll be using yet. But Get Image and Canva and Crayon were these other ones that were, like, I was even just shocked that like last year I was making AI generated images on Canva. Like, that's just like the fact that it's at that point, but it's accessible. So yeah, so just the difference between these things, then I'll be reiterating them later, but like with Midjourney, yeah, it was like you'd use descriptive text. At version 5 was only descriptive text at the time. Get Image was image prompt and descriptive text, which was very useful. Canva was just descriptive text, and so was Crayon. But very interesting thing happened as a practitioner for me when I started using the text prompt. I realized that in order to kind of get the computer on board with what my imagination was trying to make real in front of me on a screen, I had to bend my language, and it really, for me, it really like, you know, my judgment of how in the National Archives, how on a census you're gonna say Stanley is a daughter and is like 1 year old and blah blah blah, we live on this address, and it was like I'm now confronted with like this text box and being like, I want an image of a 1940s Irish lesbian in a pinstripe suit. And immediately, you know, I was like suddenly kind of backed into the ropes of feeling like I was like labeling and doing these things that are transgressive in my community, and at least to my experience, and was deeply kind of excited and fascinated by that because it was such a surprising stage. And like, yeah, just in terms of what these results were, like, oh, hold on. Another thing as well on this point too was when I was like in my like current research, the Irish language, in the Irish language, the word for folklore is broken up between two. It's Béal Aegis, and it's a word that is broken up with mouth and instructions. So Béal is mouth and Aegis is instructions, and I was there with thinking, being like, you know, the word for keyboard in Irish is Merclar, and thinking, is this Merclar Aegis? And it was just kind of this kind of idea of contemporary folklore, in a sense, or at least being very literal about instruction. So with that as well, this was the very first results that were very, you know, very much me being in conflict with computer, because, you know, this idea of the moment I mention woman and the machine has these cinched waists, this femininity-ness, and I was like, no, like, Stanley is stockish, and I just like was so frustrated with this, but also, yeah, like, you know, there's just very obvious early versions of AI traces in these images, and it made me think as an artist again of being like, well, that's part of this process. Like just the missing of an arm, or the creepiness of the faces, the smoothness of the skin, and how this is AI's thumbprint in terms of what I would actually be leaving on my own tintype plates. So yeah, it was also just at the time, I think when I was notebooking and my first responses, it was like I didn't realize how much I was kind of within the loading bar. I was kind of waiting to kind of be struck with an image of Stanley, and it made me realize this kind of machine horror, that my actual expectations was wanting something spiritual from a machine. That was in my notes at least. Following through then, just an example of what crayon software is like, and this lack of connection I was getting as well, because I was like, you know, Irish woman, like dressed in men's suit, short haircut, masculine posture, like trying to kind of be heavy-handed with the machine in a way, in my limited sense, sitting at a kitchen cottage in a table round Stanley's lifetime, and yeah, just being like, yes, literally, I guess, but also no, that's not what's in my mind. So what was very exciting then was using last year Get Image, which was the image prompt and text box, because for an image I thought, why not use my own? And then the machine got interesting, because within the same descriptions in the text prompts, the image generated a couple that I didn't tell it to, and I was like, okay, it's being more imaginative than me now, even a little dog. But also still kind of being like, you know, not fully, I kind of, you know, I got something and it interested me, and I thought, well, what if I use a photo of me that was a portrait of myself to get a portrait of Stanley? And then this image happened, and that really made me go, oh, like resemblance is a big thing. And you know, it felt more humanizing than just text prompts immediately. And I also had this idea of this figure that I looked up to, like it had like this kind of Hollywood kind of like chiseledness too, so I was like, Stanley's cool. And which made me excited, because it was about this kind of like, you know, big older siblingness kind of energy too, of me looking up to somebody as well, and it was, you know, it felt complimentary. And I think as well, I felt like my own image, using my own image, like was also an act of vouching for Stanley, and Stanley's humanness and like family belonging. I really felt like, you know, I was being a reference in the real key way. And Stanley's existence coming before me was Stanley's vouching for me, so I felt like I was returning a favour too. And then yeah, so kind of just explaining, or again in just a slide, was just kind of being like, this is what my journey is like. It's next on my mid journey. So yeah, image prompts, text prompts, and perimeters. So it's just to kind of say that, you know, only since April of this year has this been updated. And yeah, I'm excited about it. And then now, so back along with that interview as well with Anna, my Auntie Rita, I noticed, like listening back, just how we talk about family photos, and it kind of really surprised me. Yeah, I was like in Marion Hirsch's writing as well. Photography's social functions are integrally tied to the ideology of the modern family. And with that, just to listen to what this was like.
That is like so dead ringer from my mum.
Isn't it?
So just to explain, yeah, we were looking at other family photos when we on that visit, and it just made me think of the parallel of my process of looking at a photo of Stanley and family likeness and just how we talk about family photos as well. And just it just struck with me the idea of saying that's the image of you when it's a resemblance. But
Yeah.
That is like so dead ringer for my mum.
Isn't it?
I know exactly you're on there, like, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's my granny.
Yeah.
My mother and my grandmother, isn't it?
Oh, hold on, I say you're listening, but it's, no, it's Auntie Matt, Auntie Pat, and I think two of the Millses, and one of the McAdams. The guy's McAdam at the back.
I think that's Anne.
That is you,
No,
Val.
no, that-
Oh, that's you.
It's even the way you,
Really?
it's even the way you're
That's
standing
you
or
and
something.
everything.
Yeah, sorry.
I actually,
Oh, that's gas.
I think you,
No, that as soon as I seen that photograph, that's Corafee.
Oh, that's gas. Well, of course, I see Anne.
Well, a lot of people have said it or
Yeah.
something like that, but yeah, no, but
Oh, no, that's
No,
Auntie
that-
Matt.
yeah.
It's Auntie
I
Matt.
think
that's
it's-
more Anne. Really? Including me.
Yeah, I just think,
That's the
That's
scary face of that
just
one.
the image of you.
That's so my mum, yeah.
or maybe at that age or
That's
something.
so like you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like
Yeah. And these are the Millses.
I think
Okay.
it is.
So
Well,
see the
That's Patsy.
somebody confirmed it was, yeah.
You
Yeah.
just see, I feel like you can see Connor
Patsy
Patrick's
and-
face as well.
Eva.
so yeah. Yeah, so I think in terms of using my own image and resemblance and how we even do that in photos anyway, I thought was kind of a very interesting new thing to discover in this project. And then when I was tracing back more information from that cousin Edward, he replied with a photo of Hannah Monaghan, who was on the family tree, which was Stanley's aunt. So Louise is Stanley the first sister. And yeah, my great grandmother. So just thinking then now of possible image prompts and, you know, resemblances that could also be rather than myself with photos that I also have, and also then like, you know, this is very classic historical photo style. Just like as well on the point of like, you know, the images we keep of people and what got to be kept versus the outsider misfit that is queer. And yeah, then to kind of just share lately with what my own tintypes are looking like. So when I gave the machine an image of myself after later kind of attempts, I came up with this one, and yeah, I kind of, you know, this then was right beside it is what it was like when I first started making tintypes with the images, and just immediately that material quality difference, but also I was so shocked, but this was just a test run that I was expecting to come into lots of kind of issues with, but it turned out to be a success in actually being able to get an exposure. And then just in terms then of this thinking of response of this and Marion Hirsch's writing again, photography's relation to loss and death is not to mediate the process of individual and collective memory, but to bring the past back in form of a ghostly revenant, emphasizing at the same time its immutable and irreversible pastness and irretrievability, which I think really you know, just this irretrievability is very much part of what I'm reckoning with too. And this is my personally, for me, when it comes to this strike of what an image I'm looking for, these photographs have just for me have had this response of when I made this plate, I was just kind of like, this feels like just another bit more of this Stanley I'm looking for, as much as I feel like I also am potentially running into trouble of you know, just what happens when you kind of are with a project for a long time. And then just to kind of show the process of, you know, next to an illustration of traditional tintype making and actually what it's like for me to make these plates. I literally have this laptop sat on its side, and yeah, just kind of guessing and testing exposure times that are correct. And yeah, I would love to hand out the tintype results from these and just have a look, and also just experience what it is to deal with a tactile old photo. That's not an old photo, but trying to tell you it is. Yeah, and so just other artists and theorists and sources of imagination for me. The Sweet Flypaper of Life was put into my consciousness, and it just kind of gave me this idea of putting fiction that's real information. And yeah, I don't know, I can kind of go into all of these people in their own separate ways, but happy to kind of pass on the slide later to anybody. Then yeah, kind of just finally as well, just a kind of a longer kind of recording then of this was just my mom talking about Stanley. And I think it's just kind of nice final thoughts to be left with. So thank you.
Because queerness wasn't outwardly acknowledged in families then because of the Catholic Church. Stanley was mentioned but only in brief passing, so it was never really actively spoken about. You know, it was always Stanley had left and nobody knew what happened to Stanley, but that was about it. And it was like, it was a great excuse to not properly acknowledge who Stanley was. Where there was always so much spoken about all the rest of the relatives and, you know, who they were and where it happened and, you know, how they lived, how they died. Stanley was just brushed over.
Yeah, I like.
So then it leaves you to the point of imagining who Stanley might have been
Even
as an
when
individual.
he was alive, or she was alive, you're still imagining
You're still,
who is Stanley.
yeah, I mean, not even sure where Stanley is buried. In a family where, you know, they practice these rituals so like fervently. There's so much emphasis put on funerals and wigs and where they died, and even with other relatives, some of them who did die in England were brought home to be buried. Stanley was just quietly forgotten about. Yeah.
What's the name of our relative that then did all the family tree stuff?
Edward.
Yeah. And like he found a newspaper clipping about Stanley's mum passing, like his mum, like her mum.
Yes.
But like a generation before could trace down a mention of Stanley with nothing directly about Stanley.
Nothing directly about Stanley. No. And it was always the only thing that was mentioned about Stanley was that Stanley apparently came across as an angry individual, which is hardly surprising. If everybody dismissed Stanley and didn't want to know, and it was like, you know, Stanley was like, you know, a bad secret of the family that nobody wanted to really acknowledge, was effectively shunned in a way.
Like I wouldn't have known about Stanley if it wasn't for coming across that photo at that time. That I can't find anymore.
Yeah, but then
it's like a miracle that I was actually told. Like I actually was around someone that knew.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And that Auntie Rita even could, you know, happen to mention, recall, and like about Stanley, even the little snippets. And even at that, Auntie Rita had very limited information about Stanley.
And like couldn't even tell me where a photo could be placed.
No.
Same in Edward as well, like
Yeah. It's like nobody wanted to know.
Like we have your great grandmother's photo.
Yeah.
And nothing on Stanley.
No, nothing. So, which is really sad. Like
it's really
when you
sad.
think of the amount of, you know, queer relatives and people that are like from the past that were never given a proper acknowledgement, never mind even probably a proper burial.
So yeah, thank you. yeah, I would love any and all questions, thoughts, or ideas. So yeah, that's it so far. So thanks very much.
Questions?
Yeah, questions?
Does anyone have any questions? No?
Thank you so much for this interesting talk. So I have a question about something that struck me that you said a little bit towards the end of your presentation. So at some point you said when you found this image, it was sort of closer to the idea of Stanley that you had, or the Stanley that you were looking for. And I take it from your talk that said you have a Stanley sort of mixture of, you know, descriptions that you've heard, right? So there's an idea of accuracy, but there's also sort of part that is your imagination. So could you say a little bit more about how you balance those?
Good. How do I balance those? I think almost how I balance those is the kind of measuring stick between what I'm getting back from the machine and me being like, yeah, no. Like a kind of, like just a kind of the selectiveness of results. That, and also, like, have you ever tried to remember a photo you saw once when you 13 years ago and then think, am I seeing that photo yet, as you go through loads and loads of images? So there's also just that idea of, am I going to see that photo again? I've been through my family photos once since I've been back in Ireland, trying to find anything I can of Stanley, and I've been through my family photos since my grandmother has passed and her images, and trying to find a photo of Stanley and not being able to find anybody. Even in that recording, or even that day of that recording with Auntie Rita, we had some photos and being like, do you know who this is? Because this is an unnamed person, and there was like this, no, we don't know, and we didn't think it was Stanley. So there's also like, you know, this kind of question of like what is confirmation alternative? And then also, yeah, just kind of admitting onus to being like, I have desire in confirmation, and my desire is also this other bit part fantasy fiction too. But admitting that and being like, it's what's in place, and it's what comes from a, you know, and like a generation down from Stanley at least. So perhaps that's of use, but it's an admitted limitation, and I think it's a kind of a relatable alternative that we end up with in other circumstances too. And I think it's part of what you kind of get at this kind of conversation, you know. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Kind of on that, but I was struck by a similar point in the talk, but what I was struck with as well was a sense of familiarity, of almost you were looking for a desire, but also, like, you had a desire of what you wanted to see, but also perhaps, like, you know, when your family was talking about the photos, like, you see other people in them and you recognise, I don't know, even though it's someone you don't know, there is still someone, I don't know, things that you do.
Yeah.
And so as much as there is this desire in terms of what you're going and looking for, there is also perhaps these knowledges or things that you know and understand that are hard to give word or shape to. Because you know your mum or you know your brother, and you might see them in her as well. So I was just wondering if there was any of those when you found, when the pictures came out, were there any other kind of weird moments of familiarity or like things you recognised?
What was funny with this first image, when my mom first saw this image and I texted it to her, she's like, God, that looks like my cousin Clara. And I didn't think of it much then at the moment, but I thought that was like, you know, it's part of the game that we play when we look at photos of our family, of like, who is this of us? And yeah, I think that's kind of like, you know, for me there's obvious reluctancies with like interacting and like welcoming in an artificial image, but also with, you know, this you know, are just, yeah, like for me, like I'm like as a photographer and my medium and how I practice, this is like almost the enemy software because it's telling people to not use my services, but at the same time it's this great device for this particular like project and outlet. Yeah, and I think it's kind of, you know, it's not like as if I'm trying to insert this as Stanley. I'm very acutely like sensitive to that. Like I'm there being like, this is this bridge figure. This is this person is this, becomes this third type of stand-in for this journey to Stanley I'm trying to get to. I think that's the most comfortable I can be with holding that image, rather than saying that's Stanley. But at the same time, it's kind of like that's our Stanley. I don't know, like kind of this is our shell for a ghost, like that. But yeah, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a question which is about the place of narrative, I suppose, because I think reusing photographs to reconstruct things often tends to point towards stories, but I thought that there was an interesting dance kind of around and sometimes away from narrative and what you're doing, particularly because of your creative practice. I don't know, I wonder whether you could say something about the place of narrative or story, or perhaps the non-place of narrative.
The non-place of narrative. Very interesting.
That it might be something that you're not quite searching for, because I felt that there were lots of other rather more interesting kind of resonances going on about familiarity, about recognition, about moments actually. When I felt that there were lots of episodes and moments, and what they might be adding up to is something.
I think all of that output is accidental, because for me, like, it's not my wheelhouse of in my practice. Is like, for me, it's like archiving this journey to what I'm figuring out is just like, it's just happened because it's building itself, and like I you know, I just felt like, you know, this is worked as a great way of telling Stanley's story, and like, yeah, like it's a story that's kind of happening to me, because for me, as like, I'm doing all of this purely like what's happening, and what I'm conscious of what's happening only is I'm doing this as a practitioner of photography, and this is just like, I feel like I'm only newly kind of interested and excited by the presentation format of things because of this Irish storytellerness that we have, but in terms of like non-narrative, like I think like this whole kind of like closer and closer like kind of point movement to the next Stanley image or the next information we can get on Stanley, I think has been like kind of just, yeah, it's a thing that's kind of just happening to me as this goes on, but yeah, no, it's definitely something I'll be kind of, I have to play and create with for creating further, but yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Issey. Wondered, because you obviously present this project as that you have your authorial imprints on it, right? And you know, you have put in the prompts, you have put in the images, there's those parameters you've decided with the. I've been thinking all this while, the function that the Tintype method is performing for this project, you know, and the kind of, I was thinking about Walter Benjamin and Aura, because the image that is generated by the GAN model or an AI model, it's as an artist, you're obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, uncomfortable, because the apparatus is completely mysterious. Like, you have no idea how we got to that image. Whereas with Tintype, the apparatus is completely in your control. So there's in the two stages of the project, there is this great contrast that the apparatus of AI as opposed to say if you were sketching. There was an exhibition here in CRASSH a couple of years ago when the a Syrian refugee artist who was displaced had sketches of objects that they remembered as a child from the home of their displacement. There was a sort of candelabra and a pencil box, and it's at the heart of it, it's the same thing. It's less about Stanley or less about the house, but the desire on our part to formalize our memory. But whereas she would not have felt uncomfortable with the sketch because the sketch is entirely coming from within herself, the apparatus of the AI is like it's a black box. So you have, and therefore, am I right in thinking that it needs like the Tintype method to give it back some kind of an aura or some kind of an authority in your thumbprint? So I suppose my question is, what would be lost if I took the Tintype entirely out of the picture?
Interesting question.
Right.
Let me see. I mean, in terms of even, I think even to simply even like go back to its archival gesture, and say that like, you know, this photo that has been lost, like even a digital file or a printout or anything like that, like they do disintegrate over time. If you put if I did a whole lifetime narrative story of Stanley's life via AI images and put it on a USB key, that USB key would still disintegrate over time. With tintypes, as much as they have these grits and characteristics and qualities, if you take those away, and if it's just on something that can last like beyond more like generations of mine to possibly be an image that can be interacted with by like where I'll be the ancestor to queer family members, and it's this like, you know, for me it's this idea then that I'm creating this baton of queer honor in my family in a way. And I think it's kind of a joy to work with Tintype. I already was working with beforehand. And I think, yeah, like perhaps it's part vouching again of literal thumbprint and fingerprint traces of my own, which is in a way signature too, but for me it's the fact that it's an image that I can have confidence and trust in really outliving me and being put in, like invested into the future, would be what the Tintype offers.
So if, can I go again?
Yeah.
So if the Tintype went back into the family album and then everybody forgot about your project, say, it would blend right in. People would forget that. So there's and there was a question actually in your presentation somewhere, and I mean it was thrown to us, so we've been thinking about it, but I wanted to know what you thought about the sort of kind of the ethics of the image going back in and then the context disappearing around it, and so everybody stumbles upon this image 20 years down the line. It's like, oh, that's Stanley, but that is not Stanley.
I know.
Right? And so
I think that's what's so exciting about archives. Like it is a potential consequence of doing this, and yeah, like there is a tremendous responsibility in what I choose to actually pick out the image that will be turned into a Tintype. Like the ones that I have made so far is, you know, for me, not an official outcome. It's part of the trial and error process. It's a testing stage of being able to do this. That being said, it still is a object that can actually still last a very long time. They're not varnished yet though, so they're not actually guaranteed to last as long yet too, which is why they're quite scuffed. But yeah, I think like, you know, photos of me can have their names lost. It's far less likely now in the modern times that we're in, but there's already images within my family photo that weren't Stanley, that didn't have their names written down yet, and there's just this risk as well of generations going by who have this information and knowledge of people. And I think there's only so much in my control, or at least there's only so much I've figured out yet. And I think that's kind of what's, it's definitely part of what I'm reckoning with here. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you have any like speculation or like I guess stories about kind of what you imagine Stanley got up to, what, like in London. Like do you have like a kind of like an image in your head of like Stanley's life? Like
There was one anecdote that I have of Stanley, but I feel like I'll get to that after, because I want to answer your question first because it's really fun. I don't really have like, I feel like because it's my imagination and I'm a strange person, I almost have, because of the pinstripe suit, like clue. My brain is half like this ridiculous Bugsy Malone type of lifestyle of like, you know, Stanley about town, and then another part of me is just kind of like, I'm a shy, awkward person sometimes, and I'm a, you know, like how much awareness of like, you know, a repressive Catholic society like sits with you when you leave that place, and you know, like what is it like to become your own person? I like to think that that's what Stanley got to have, was they left and they got to just find community. Like if there's anything that I want and I like to have, like, you know, if there's anything that I actually deliberately want and desire to find out about Stanley, it's something like that. Whereas I kind of celebrate all of the other like kind of parts where Stanley wasn't particularly liked because they were angry, because it's like, of course, and like good, like express that. But one anecdote I got about Stanley was from my grandmother. Stanley was older than my grandmother, and one time she visited my gran and gave her a gift of a watch. But before she left that evening, she kind of changed her mind and liked the watch, so she like secretly took back the watch and left. And there was this idea of like my family being like, oh man, Stanley's so mean and like greedy, and it was just kind of like, oh, it's actually just like that's some character at least I get to have. I think like, yeah, like that's funny, sure you're not gonna like win any favors that way, but it's a really funny story. And I'm glad that something bold happened, because that like left an impression and I got to learn something. But yeah, I think in terms of Stanley's life and what I desire to picture, it's kind of like for me, I celebrate all ugly parts too. So it's the more I can kind of get information, it's like I have a mission of desire, but at the same time, I really just would love to know what the truth is.
Yeah, that's so cool. This is follow-up is kind of not, basically I was just thinking that you might, if you haven't read it already, there's this really cool book called like Grease Paint by Hannah Levine, which like just came out, and it's basically set in all these like butch piano bars in New York. I feel like the pinstripe suit kind of like made me think of that, but Hannah Levine, who's the author, I'm pretty sure that she was doing like a creative writing like PhD, so it's like archival research, but it's like she's kind of brought it to life with this kind of like experimental like text, and it's just really cool, and like butch and mask like kind of aesthetics, and like yeah, I just think it might be I found it really fun to read, and I feel like you might like it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I'd love if anybody anyone else as well has any sort of text that are theory, movies, or anything that they think would be relevant to this project as well, because that's very much how I kind of respond to things too, very visual. So thank you.
Does anyone have any more questions, or should we wrap up? Well, thank you, Issey. Thank you for everyone for coming. Please do come back, but not here at King's, we have another session which is about making an archive with Tintype. And I think we'll even get our own photos taken, quite excitingly. Yeah, so that's 2 at King's. Yeah, thank you. Please come again.